This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt podcast. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. Today, we're going to tackle a case from my home city, Madison, Wisconsin. The murder trial just finished last month, in May 2022, and the guilty will face sentencing early this fall. If you Google this case, you may find pictures of the convicted in a photo op with Madison Mayor Satea Rhodes Conway, which she probably regrets taking. The guilty were a part of a community program that was supposed to keep youth out of trouble and help instill a moral compass. This program might be beneficial for some kids, but unfortunately, it wasn't in this case. You're listening to episode 58, Khari Sanford. The Arboretum in Madison, Wisconsin is over 1,200 acres of land that sits a few miles outside of the UW campus. It is both a teaching and research facility for the university. The Arboretum is also a popular destination for hikers, runners, bikers, skiers, and snowshoers. The Arboretum is warmly called the Arb by Madisonians and is one of the city's treasures. So it was very shocking when UW and city police were called to the Arboretum on March 31st, 2020 at 6:26 a.m. The last time the campus police had been involved in a murder investigation was 1982. The entrance of the Arboretum is right down the road from the Vilas Zoo, where Arboretum Drive intersects with North Winger Drive. Two different joggers called police when they spotted two bloody bodies laying just off the road by the entrance. Paramedics attended to the victims. The male was deceased, and the female showed some signs of life. The male was face down on the ground and had a discernible head wound. The blood that pooled around the victims and the splatter patterns showed that they were shot where they were found. There were several .357 SIG spent shell casings on the ground. The female had on pajamas with no socks or shoes, and the male victim was only wearing underwear. It was cold that night, and the officer noted the temperature was 30 degrees Fahrenheit. They immediately transported the female to the University of Wisconsin Hospital. She was in awful shape and was pronounced dead at the hospital at 7:54 a.m. One detective found a woman who lived close to the Arboretum who said that she heard 2 gunshots, then a 5-second pause, followed by 4 or 5 more shots. She believed this happened sometime between 11:02 and 11:12 p.m. on March 30th. She had been using a device, which was why she could give such a tight time frame. Autopsies were conducted, and they confirmed the victims as married couple Robin Carre and Beth Potter. 57-year-old Robin died of homicidal violence with a shotgun wound that entered the left side of his head by his ear. 52-year-old Beth died of homicidal violence with gunshot wounds to the back of her head and upper arm. They fired the shots from close range. Detectives had names for the victims and were interviewing people in the couple's lives. Beth Potter had a friend that she spoke with on the day that she died. They took a walk around 5:30 p.m. on March 30th, 2020. Beth told her friend that she had been frustrated by her daughter, Miriam Potter Carre, and her daughter's boyfriend, Khari Sanford. Even though the kids were still seniors in high school, Beth and her husband, Robin, moved them out of their house and into an Airbnb. When the kids were moving out of the Khari Potter household, Miriam said things like, "You don't care about me," and "You don't talk to me." Khari said very little. Miriam's complaints were inconsistent, since in her parents' home, she and Khari holed up in her room where they ordered food and didn't really speak to Beth. Beth's friend felt that there had been more going on than she was being told that day. Beth was very frustrated with the situation, and her friend said that Beth was rarely worked up for any reason. The next interview that the detective sought was Beth Potter's manager at the University of Wisconsin Hospital and Clinics. Worries about COVID were just hitting the United States, and Beth was a physician who helped with the pandemic. She also had a medical condition that put her at greater risk. Khari and Miriam were both living in her house, but were not following her rules about social distancing. Instead of staying home, they were out and about, hanging around with friends. Beth's supervisor said that Beth had a lot of negative feelings about Khari, and she wasn't composed when she spoke about the teens. This was unusual, as Beth was calm and poised in most situations, but her home life was a point of contention. The next interview was with Miriam Potter Carre, who was the adopted daughter of Beth Potter and Robin Carre. She had been living at 213 Sunnymead Lane for about 2.5 weeks, which was close to the Alliant Energy Center on the south side of Madison. Miriam was living at this Airbnb until she could find an apartment. She told detectives she wasn't going to self-quarantine, as her father had been doing at his house. Her mother was still going to work to help with the pandemic, so her parents moved her and her boyfriend, Khari Sanford, into the short-term rental. Miriam was in love with him and was loyal to him. Her parents had lent them a white VW minivan since they did not have a car, which was parked close to their Airbnb. Miriam said she was with Khari the entire night of March 30th through the 31st. She claimed that they were in by 10:15 that night and watched The Hangover 2 before they went to bed. Of course, Madison has traffic cameras all around the city, and when detectives reviewed that footage, a white VW minivan was seen by the victim's house. Then the vehicle was on the UW campus, and it stopped at the Arboretum. Afterward, the van was seen on South Park Street. There might have been a few handfuls of white VW minivans driving around Madison, but what made the footage interesting were 5 stickers placed on the rear of the van, including a large yellow sticker on the driver's side bumper. This bumper sticker configuration on the video perfectly matched the car that Miriam and Khari borrowed. Miriam was caught in a lie. This lie was confirmed another way. Her cell phone was examined by a digital forensic analyst on April 2nd, 2020. They recovered her call and message logs and GPS data that showed she was not with the VW minivan as it was driven all over the city on the night of the murders. Here were some of Miriam's messages that night. At 9:48 p.m., Miriam called Khari, but he didn't pick up. At 9:50 p.m., Miriam texted one of her friends. He didn't pick up. At 11:02 p.m., Miriam texted Khari, "At least bring back the car and have someone get you from here. I don't feel safe here." At 11:13 p.m., she texted Khari again. "Why would you put me in this position?" Miriam sent her friend several texts in a row at 11:19 p.m. "I hear him, I think, though. Like I think he just pulled up. Like with someone. But yes, it's him." At 11:22 p.m., she continued to text her friend. "It's Huncho. His friend got into a situation." Then Miriam sent her friend another text at 11:26 p.m. "I want to cry, but I'm also in an apartment with him, and it's literally 2.5 rooms, so that's fun." Detectives wanted to speak with Khari's friend, known as Huncho. As police were interviewing other high school kids in Khari and Miriam's circle, they found a friend of Khari's that was named DF in the criminal complaint. DF told detectives that Huncho was a kid known as Elijah LaRue, and he was with Khari on the night of March 30th. DF was friends with both Miriam and Khari. They all attended Madison West High School. DF overheard Khari and Miriam talking during a ceramics class right before the pandemic hit and in-person classes were canceled. They were discussing how they could get money. Miriam told Khari that her parents were rich and had bands of money. DF thought that bands were a reference that likely meant they had thousands in cash. The day after the crime, Khari was at DF's house. Khari was worked up and pacing and sweating in DF's room. He called Elijah LaRue and said that on social media, it said one victim from the Arboretum murders was in the hospital and they might be alive. Khari said, "I swear I hit them. How did they survive?" He was worried about being identified. After the phone call ended, Khari told DF that he committed the murders in the Arboretum and he shot the victims in the back of the head. He also said LaRue was with him when he committed the murders. Khari wanted DF to help him hide the gun, but DF declined. Police had not publicized the injuries that the victims sustained, so this information helped verify that they were closing in on the correct suspect. Police interviewed Elijah LaRue, aka Huncho. He agreed to have his phone analyzed. The GPS lined up with the locations and times that matched the investigators' timeline of events. At 9:30 p.m. on March 30th, 2020, LaRue's phone showed he was at his home at 614 East Johnson Street in Madison. He then traveled west on Gorham Street, which turned into University. Elijah was near West High School, by Raleigh Avenue. Between 9:40 and 10:40 p.m., he was west of Breeze Terrace, north of Monroe Street, south of University Ave, and east of Farley Ave. There were multiple drive-bys of 2212 Raleigh Avenue, where Beth Potter and Robin Carre lived. From 10:40 to 10:52 p.m., there were multiple points that were close to Beth and Robin's house. At 10:53 p.m., the vehicle went past Edgewood College on Edgewood Avenue. At 10:57 p.m., the car was on North Wingwood Drive and Vilas Park Drive, which was near the entrance of the Arboretum. For the next several minutes, from 11:02 to 11:06 p.m., GPS plots showed the vehicle circling around the Arboretum and in the neighborhood close by. At 11:06 p.m., the van was at the intersection right by the Arboretum. Then they were moving at 11:12 p.m. and headed towards the Airbnb. The GPS showed that they were in that area from 11:20 p.m. to midnight. At 12:10 a.m., the van traveled to LaRue's residence on East Johnson. A person who worked at a church on 2121 Raleigh Avenue offered police the building surveillance video, and they were about a block away from Robin and Beth's home. The video captured the white VW minivan at 9:43, 9:53, 9:59, and 10:05 p.m., which was consistent with LaRue's GPS cell phone data. Detectives spoke with someone who lived close to the Airbnb on Sunnymead Lane. They had a video that showed two people walking out of a van and throwing items into the woods on this person's property. When police searched the area, they found a balled-up piece of mail that belonged to Beth Potter, with her Raleigh Avenue address, and a cell phone that had been smashed to pieces. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. HelloFresh gives you fresh, pre-measured ingredients and mouth-watering recipes delivered right to your front door. HelloFresh lets you skip those trips to the grocery store and makes home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Every week you get to pick from 50 different meal options. You can swap out proteins or upgrade your meals. You can skip weeks of meals if you need to, or change the delivery day. And I've done all those things because I've actually been using HelloFresh for months, long before they've sponsored my podcast. I've been living between two cities in Tennessee for a few months now, and HelloFresh has helped keep my sanity. I don't have to think about anything other than selecting the meals I want. And the best part is that they always have some type of sauce or twist or something that really adds a lot to the meal, and it's something that I would never be able to come up with on my own, and it's my favorite part. Go to HelloFresh.com/Beyond16 and use the promo code Beyond16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. That's HelloFresh.com/Beyond16. Promo code Beyond16. HelloFresh, they're America's #1 meal kit. Now, back to the show. 18-year-old Khari Sanford was arrested on April 3, 2020, and 18-year-old Elijah LaRue was arrested the next day. They were charged with first-degree intentional homicide. The prosecutor believed that the crime began as a burglary that became a kidnapping and ended in murder. The prosecutor did not charge Miriam Potter Khari with any crime. Both teens initially entered not guilty pleas at the pretrial hearings. LaRue's defense team asked the judge for a separate trial from Sanford, which was granted. LaRue, who had been friends with Sanford since elementary school, eventually signed a plea agreement for lesser charges of 2 counts of felony murder, kidnapping as party to a crime. Khari Sanford's attorneys withdrew from his case because of a conflict that was caused by Sanford. A second reason for the withdrawal was Sanford filed a complaint against his attorneys with the State Office of Lawyer Regulation. The specific grievance was unknown since the complaint was confidential. The attorneys contacted the public defender's office to find him a new legal team. They housed Sanford in the Dane County Jail, and he requested to have his $1 million cash bond lowered. The court denied this request. Sanford wrote a letter to the judge where he explained the details of his dysfunctional childhood, including the incarceration of his father. He detailed all the social justice projects that he was involved in, including a community program called the Brotherhood, which specializes in keeping African American kids ages 13 to 17 connected with their community and out of trouble. Sanford wrote about how the public villainized him. He never wrote about guilt or innocence. Had the judge seen Sanford's social media, she would have known that one of his projects was centered on policing the police. However, he inappropriately conveyed this message by boldly posing with his handgun. It was true. The public did villainize Khari Sanford. The impending trial for Sanford was a high-profile case in Madison and around the nation. This story was picked up in many public media outlets, and the community in Madison had strong feelings about the heinousness of the crime. During the pretrial hearings, the judge made a decision that there would be no live streaming of the trial. The media was only allowed one 10-second video, and that video had to be deleted after 24 hours. There were no recordings of any type allowed outside of the media room. Both the defense and the prosecution were happy with this decision and had asked that live streaming be prohibited. The prosecution was concerned about their witnesses being able to testify without worry or feeling pressure from the community. This was especially true after the Chandler Halderson trial, which was another high-profile murder case in the area. He was the son who killed and dismembered his parents. The media was unhappy about the judge's decision. The president of the Wisconsin Freedom of Information Council said that this ruling placed a serious and unusual constraint on the media, making it difficult for them to do their job. He said that the public had a right to have the proceedings broadcasted. All the local Madison news stations tried to challenge the judge's order, but this was denied. The judge allowed still photographs of law enforcement, the defendant, the attorneys, and court personnel. Photos of the witnesses were forbidden. Between the pandemic, the pretrial hearings, and Sanford changing lawyers, his trial didn't begin until over 2 years after the crime. Opening statements began on May 17, 2022. William Brown, the prosecutor, laid out a case that Sanford hated his girlfriend's parents, and he planned their murders. Elijah LaRue was a key witness that was going to testify and held key evidence for this case. Brown said he had evidence that Sanford's phone connected to the victim's Wi-Fi on the night of the kidnapping and murder. Dr. Potter's blood and Sanford's DNA were found on the same piece of clothing. That Mr. Khari died immediately, but Dr. Beth Potter laid in a ditch with severe injuries next to her dead husband throughout the night at the Arboretum. She suffered through the cold night, only to die in a hospital the next morning. Medical experts said if she would have received immediate help, she might have lived with a diminished quality of life. Their daughter, Miriam, was having problems both at home and at school. Her parents didn't care for Sanford, but allowed him to stay in their home. Then they paid for an Airbnb for the kids when they weren't following the COVID precautions laid out by Dr. Beth Potter. Dr. Potter was the medical director for UW Health's Employee Services for Wellbeing, and she helped to shape COVID policy protections for the department's employees. Tracy Lencioni was Sanford's defense attorney, and she claimed that Khari Sanford was just a kid. She said that there was no direct evidence that he killed Beth Potter or Robin Carre. Tracy said experts did not extract GPS data from Khari's phone. She stated that the prosecution didn't have the murder weapon, and Khari's DNA was not found on the shell casings that were at the scene of the crime. Tracy reminded the jury that any feelings of ill will felt by Khari were just teenage angst at an atypical time, referring to the COVID-19 pandemic. She objected to the prosecutor's notion that there were rising tensions in the household. The prosecution called multiple friends and colleagues of Beth Potter and Robin Carre to testify. Beth's therapist stated that she had several conversations about all the problems with the teenagers in her home. Beth's brother testified that they had a text exchange on the night she died. She was not afraid of Khari and Miriam's disrespect for her, or the fact they communicated very little with her, or the fact that they refused to follow rules of the house. These things did not make her uncomfortable. However, it was the lack of communication from Sanford that created discomfort and worry with Beth. Beth's coworker testified that Miriam and Khari not following COVID-19 rules were a point of stress. Besides not wanting to take COVID into her work, Beth was high risk and had a personal concern with catching COVID. Miriam and Khari were going to different friends' homes, and they would be gone for hours at a time. The pandemic had Beth working long hours, and she worked 7 days each week in March 2020. Beth monitored employees' symptoms and performed employee screens before they went into the clinic. May 18, 2022, marked the second day of the trial. Miriam Potter Khari invoked her Fifth Amendment rights. The state granted her immunity and compelled her to testify. She intentionally looked away from Sanford as she made her way to the stand. Miriam and Khari started their relationship in 2019, and it grew stronger by the fall of that year. Beth and Robin were concerned because Miriam's grades were slipping, and she was struggling with her mental health because she spent a lot of time worrying about her boyfriend's problems. Sanford did not have a permanent home, and he lived in Miriam's car sometimes. He even stayed at the Potter Carre residence without them knowing. Miriam got up early and picked up her boyfriend. She would try to convince him to go to school instead of skipping out. Prosecution asked Miriam to read one of her and Sanford's text exchanges that took place prior to the murders. They were having a discussion that her parents had a white savior complex, and she said she tried to explain this to them throughout her lifetime. Sanford's text back to her said it was cool because they were going to die. Miriam didn't realize that Sanford literally meant this because he would often say things like this or use violent language in his everyday vernacular. At the end of 2019, Beth and Robin let Khari move into their house, which surprised Miriam. They laid down many rules, which included that Sanford must talk more with them, since he rarely said a word. If her parents greeted Sanford, he would not respond in kind. Beth and Robin were clear that there was a curfew, and they were not to sleep in the same room. Sanford would argue with Miriam's parents and threaten to kill himself if she didn't leave the house with him. This resulted in her being out past her curfew. Beth and Robin required the children who lived in their home to apply for college. Sanford wasn't having it. He didn't care about college and never talked about it. Miriam said that Sanford felt like a slave with the rules and boundaries that were set by her parents. Beth was stressed out and tired of the teenagers not following her COVID precautions, and she planned on asking Sanford to leave their home. Miriam's father rented them an Airbnb to bridge the gap until they could find an apartment. She was happy with her father's solution, and this brought them closer together. They would sometimes sit outside and drink coffee every time Miriam came back home to pick up more of her stuff. On March 30th, 2020, the night of the murders, Khari took the van and said he was going to a pawn shop. When he returned that night with his friend, he didn't tell Miriam where he had been or what he had done. Sanford went straight to the bathroom, and his friend Elijah LaRue sat on the couch. LaRue and Sanford smoked a blunt. Sanford asked Miriam to drive LaRue back to his home. They dropped LaRue off, and the car ride was silent for the entire trip. Sanford ultimately never told Miriam about his evening. When they woke up the next morning, Sanford wanted to smoke at the Arboretum. When they arrived, the area was surrounded by police, so they went down the road and smoked in the Vila Zoo parking lot. Miriam saw a Facebook post about the bodies that were found in the Arboretum, and the only response from Sanford was, "That's crazy." They drove back home to their Airbnb. Miriam received a call from her parents' neighbors regarding police that were outside of Beth and Robin's home. The neighbor picked up Miriam. Sanford refused to accompany his girlfriend, citing his fear of police. That was the last time Miriam saw Khari Sanford. The prosecution also included 3 photos or videos of Sanford pointing a handgun at the camera to prove that he possessed one. On May 19, 2022, the prosecution spent much of the day describing the white VW minivan that Khari Sanford drove around the city. There were videos from the UW-Madison police, the city of Madison, and McDonald's on Regent Street. The stickers on the rear of the van uniquely distinguished the vehicle from similar VW vans in the city. The videos confirmed that there was both a driver and a passenger as the van headed towards the Arboretum. On May 20th, 2022, Elijah LaRue testified for the prosecution. He thought Sanford wanted to smoke and drive around, but Sanford pulled the white VW van into the home of Beth and Robin. Sanford said he had to run in real fast, and then he returned about 15 minutes later. He pointed a gun at Beth and Robin as he ordered them into the van. Beth was in her sleepwear, while Robin only had on his underwear. Sanford told LaRue to get into the driver's seat. Sanford gave directions, and that was how they ended up at the Arboretum. Sanford was asking questions of Beth and Robin, like, "Why don't you care for your daughter?" When Beth tried to answer, Sanford would just cut her off. LaRue said Sanford was agitated for the entire drive, and he never took the gun off Beth and Robin. At the Arboretum, Sanford led Robin and Beth out to a grassy area by the entrance, as LaRue sat in the car. He saw Sanford shoot Robin in the head first and Beth second. Sanford got back in the car and told LaRue to drive them back to the Airbnb. Sanford told LaRue, "I can't believe I did it." Both men wiped down the van with baby wipes. At the Airbnb, Sanford changed his clothes while LaRue sat on the couch. He tried to call home to get a ride because he was afraid, but no one picked up. LaRue went outside with Sanford to smoke, and that was when Sanford tossed his clothes. He also smashed Beth and Robin's cell phones and pitched them into the woods. When the defense cross-examined LaRue, they emphasized he took a plea deal for lesser charges. LaRue said he took the plea deal to take responsibility for what he did. He was facing up to 110 years in prison with his current charges. The last and 5th day of the trial was on May 23, 2022. The detective responsible for the digital forensics showed that Sanford's phone connected to Beth and Robin's home Wi-Fi at 9:43 p.m. on the night they were killed. He also searched a popular website called Quora and read links about how long it takes to die and how long does it take for a person to be forgotten after they die. He searched about a Glock Generation 4 handgun and a local pawn shop. The victim's debit cards were used at several banks around Madison, but none of the withdrawals were successful since he didn't have the PIN number. Most of the attempts were for $300. Sanford was caught on bank surveillance at one of the ATMs trying to make the withdrawal. During the closing arguments, the prosecution said that Beth and Robin were like many people in March 2020. They lived in fear of COVID, but they should have really lived in fear of Khari Sanford. The defense team believed that the prosecution didn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the state's top witness, Elijah LaRue, only helped the state after a plea deal was in place. Sanford never testified in his own defense. Midday, the court took a break for lunch, and when they returned, the judge issued a warning to Sanford. He was acting up with the sheriff's deputies, and she demanded it stop. The judge also warned his defense attorneys to move away from him if he got violent. There would be no mistrials because of his bad behavior. After the closing arguments, the jury went to deliberation. It only took them 3 hours to return a guilty verdict for 21-year-old Khari Sanford. They found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, with party to a crime modifiers, in the deaths of Dr. Beth Potter and Robin Carre. Sentencing hearings were scheduled for September 7, 2022. Khari Sanford's hearing takes place in the morning, and Elijah LaRue's hearing takes place in the afternoon. Sanford could receive a mandatory life sentence, and the judge will decide if he's eligible for parole. Dr. Beth Potter and Robin Carre were survived by their biological children, Ezra and Jonah, as well as their daughter Miriam, who was adopted from Guatemala. The siblings seemingly had a close bond growing up in the Potter-Carre household, but the murder of their parents changed their relationship forever. A representative from the Potter-Carre estate filed a probate petition with the purpose of removing Miriam from inheriting any money from her mom and dad. Even though she wasn't charged with the crime, this petition stated that she was complicit in her parents' murders. The attorney who helped file the petition said, "Although Miriam may have not been physically present during the murders of her parents, that does not absolve Miriam from accountability. Miriam was a co-conspirator to rob her parents' home, knew that Sanford would use a dangerous weapon to carry out the robbery, and was involved in the plan to do so." Wisconsin has a law on the books known as the Slayer Statute, which prevents an individual from profiting off of a person that they were involved in killing, even if they were not convicted of that crime. The petition had several supporting points. Miriam was complicit in a plan with Sanford to rob her parents, which was overheard by a student at West High School. She lied and covered for Sanford during her initial interview with police. She texted Sanford a picture of him pointing a gun at the camera, which she must have taken of him. Therefore, she knew that he possessed a weapon. Miriam knew Sanford had a dangerous criminal background that included armed robbery. The petition basically stated that Miriam Potter-Carre was party to conspiracy with Khari Sanford and was responsible for the crime that started as a robbery but ended in kidnapping and murder. There has been no ruling on this petition as of June 2022. Madison is considered a good-sized city, but often it is a small, small world. Elijah LaRue's mother, Alice, was a patient of Dr. Beth Potter. Alice said that Dr. Potter was a supportive and positive person. She was a beautiful individual. Alice felt like she was in a nightmare, and her son was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Alice said that she knew down deep that her son would not take part in something like this, and that it was not part of his character. There was a small amount of irony, and perhaps perversity, found in the fact that Dr. Potter made a donation via Facebook to an area activist group, and this same activist group was raising bail money to help Elijah LaRue get out of jail. Robin Carre and Dr. Beth Potter were well known in the Madison community. Robin received his bachelor's in international relations from Knox College and a PhD in European history from the University of Illinois, Chicago. He had a certificate in independent educational consulting from UC Irvine, California. Robin owned an independent education consultant business that he started in 2014. In this business, he helped families with the college admissions process and found universities for high school kids that were an ideal match. Robin had been an adjunct professor of history at Viterbo University and was coaching director at Regent Soccer Club. Madison is a large soccer community, and Robin was a major contributor to that space. Beth Potter had a bachelor's degree in French language and literature from Knox College. She attended Rush Medical College and did her residency at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Beth was a physician at the Wingrove Family Medical Center and was the medical director of the Employee Health Services for UW Health. Beth focused her professional efforts on underserved communities, women, and families. She served as a well-respected mentor to students and residents. The Department of Family Medicine established the Beth Potter and Robin Carre Memorial Fund to help fund scholarships and fund a memorial in the UW Arboretum, which was a place they both loved. Beth and Robin both attended Knox College, and they too set up a fund in their name dedicated to public health, youth mentoring, social justice, education, and international relations. A conference room in the Wingrove Clinic was renamed after Beth Potter. Region Soccer Club established a scholarship fund in Robin's name. Dr. Beth Potter and Robin Carre are gone, but the Madison, Wisconsin community still cherishes their memory. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit beyondcontemptpodcast.com for the links to the sources and music used in this episode. Research, writing, editing, audio production, and sound design were performed by me, Renee. If you like the show, please leave me a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you so much, everyone.